This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 308, Remote Work. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about remote work with our friend Kaleem Clarkson. Kaleem is the Chief Operating Officer at BlendMe. BlendMe helps location-independent startups and small businesses improve the remote employee experience from onboarding to offboarding. We will learn more about BlendMe at the end of the show, but more about Kaleem. Kaleem has nearly 20 years of strategic operations and event planning experience. His passions have always revolved around the stakeholder experience, from concert and conference attendees to professional development programs for distributed, remote, and telecommuting employees. Kaleem also crushes Twig daily and leads the Drupal Event Organizers Working Group. Kaleem was born and raised in Bangor, Maine, the home of Stephen King. He graduated from Worcester State University and was recently named one of the top 15 remote work advocates and leaders by All American Speakers Bureau. Kaleem currently resides in Atlanta, Georgia, with his family. When he is not working, you can find him mountain biking on the trails of Georgia with his headphones, blasting a little hard rock music. Kaleem, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Wow, what an intro! Can't even lie. That was well done. You have a great voice, John. Great voice.
Well, I appreciate your kind words. I am John Picozzi, and today joining us as co-host for the next 4 weeks is Chad Hester. Chad is an experienced technical consultant, currently working with ImageX as a senior business analyst. Chad, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here. Glad to be back.
We look forward to the next 4 weeks. Going to be jam-packed with some fun stuff. So hold on to your seat. Let's jump into some updates.
What's up, Glenn? Shout out, Glenn.
Oh, he's shouting out already. He's started shouting out. Chad, we'll let you start with the updates, seeing as you're new to the show. What's going on with you?
Well, lots actually. So changed jobs November of last year. Haven't really looked back, really enjoying what I've been doing. And my wife and I got to the point where we said, you know what, we're kind of done living in our house currently in Baltimore. So we're looking to sell our house. Well, and great time to sell right now, right? So we're going to do a work abroad thing for about a year or so. And then after that, we're going to house hunt again and see how the market is.
I was going to ask where are you going, but you just answered that.
Yeah, well, we're probably going to go to British Columbia. We've been there a couple of times. We absolutely love the area, so we're going to hang out there with a lot of our friends and peers. And then after that, we're going to probably look around Canada to see what houses are like and see what we fall in love with. And we just got a new blue heeler dog too, so she'll be going with us, keeping us honest with our physical activity.
So this is going to be a dumb question, but is a blue heeler a type of dog?
Blue heeler is a type of dog. So they come in two variations, blue and red heeler. Yep. Okay. And they're both types of Australian cattle dogs.
If you could, a Wikipedia page in the resources section for the listeners would be super helpful. Also for me, I'm gonna want to follow up on that after the show.
Yeah,
and I apologize, Chad. When you said work abroad and you said BC, I was like, isn't that Vancouver?
Yeah. That's
like, oh wait, I guess technically Canada is abroad. I'm sorry, Canada. I just think of you as like cousin or a stepbrother. I don't know what to think.
On any given day, Canada's like, no, US, don't include us in your mess.
We absorb.
That rhymed, and I didn't even mean it. Anyway, moving right along. Nick, what's going on with you this week?
Good afternoon. So yeah, not too much. My wife just started a new job working from home, which means that we've been having daily affogatos. I just learned the word for it, but ice cream with coffee.
Okay. I was concerned of what that was.
Not in the morning though, right?
No, it's later after lunch.
Okay.
So every afternoon she comes up and makes one, and we have a little snack. So it's actually been nice. She's excited. This is her first time really working remote. There was a short stint at the beginning of the pandemic, but her previous job is patient facing. So, after a few months, once they cut down protocols, she had to go back into work. So this is her first fully remote position. So she's pretty excited and just started a couple of days ago.
And she can listen to this podcast. Maybe she'll get some ideas for working remote. I also thought when you started talking that you were going to say that now that she's working remote, you and her have like a daily stand up first thing in the morning. And I was gonna be like, wow, that's dedication right there. Moving on, Kaleem, what's going on with you?
Well, today I actually experienced my first COVID test.
Wow.
Yes, have not had to take a COVID test because I've been very safe, basically staying between Maine and Atlanta and staying inside our house. So yeah, that thing tickled. It kind of tickle hurted.
Did you cry? Because my
yes,
first.
I'm not gonna lie.
No judgment. But my first COVID test, I had a sinus infection, and they jammed that thing up there, and literally, I was like, I'm gonna be a strong man.
Yeah, I mean, I teared up. Yep. I won't say I fully cried. I teared up, but yeah, it was. Luckily, it came back negative, so everything's good. So that's good news. That's good news. Our daughter actually does gymnastics, and one of the kids, they had a positive test, so we were just on the safe side, want to be safe. So Clarkson family were good to go, all negative. But yeah, first test. And besides, business-wise, one of the things haven't really been able to tell too many people yet because of whatever rules they have. But on Tuesday, I'm really excited to be, speaking for United Airlines and Visa on small businesses and remote work moving forward in the digital landscape, how it's changed. So yeah, they're expecting anywhere between 10 and 20,000 people. So I'm a little nervous. They're sending it out to 300,000. So
cool.
Hopefully I'll do all right.
We'll definitely get this out on Monday so you can tell all those people to listen in.
Sure.
Shameless self-promotion. That's what we're all about.
We'll bump those statistics up.
Yeah. There you
nice.
Go.
Nice.
So, yeah, for me, I mentioned this a little bit last week, but I went whitewater rafting this past weekend for the first time. And I did not break any bones. I came back, didn't drown. Nice. So all of those things are good. It was
Did you fall in?
It was a really good time. Yes, I did fall in once. And yeah, it was all right. Once you get over like being splashed in the face with water rapidly and you kind of like remember that you shouldn't swallow that water, you kind of get okay with it, and then you get back in the boat and you just keep on going. So yeah, we had a really awesome guide, Brandy. Shout out to Brandy because she was awesome. And yeah, we were in the middle of nowhere. We were camping. It was great. We were actually in Maine, Kaleem. So
nice.
There you go. The Forks, Maine. I don't know if you've been up that far, but
no.
Yeah,
I haven't.
I don't think many people have. It's
pretty far.
It's pretty far up there. Anyway, recommend whitewater rafting if you've never been. Let's move into our module of the week. We're talking about the components module, and I'm going to pass it off to Nick because this was his suggestion.
Yeah. So the components module. So Kaleem, you mentioned Twig. If you're doing any like component-based theming in Twig or need custom namespaces, components is a must-have. It's another one of those modules that you kind of just turn it on and forget that you have, but it just allows you to set up your own custom namespaces for your own themes, and I think it'll register templates in different folders than Drupal expects them, so you can kind of organize your structure a little bit better. So it's definitely a must-have for complex projects, but it's another good one.
Cool. There you go. Module of the week coming in strong. Let's move on to our primary topic. So Kaleem, right off the bat, we're here talking about remote work. How would you define remote work or working remote? And is that, is remote work the right term for what that thing is?
That's a great question, John. I would say first off, remote work's been around for a while. I think dating back to like early 60s. I think one of the oil crises back then really pushed people to work remotely. The original term was called telework, which you may hear still in government fields and abroad and stuff like that. But basically working remote is just, the general term is just not working within the office, working away from an on-site office. But I think it's important, right now, I think that's the biggest challenge that we're having. the quote unquote remote work industry is relatively new as far as professionals studying it and researching it. But what we've kind of decided at Bland is to kind of like, we're hearing a lot of definitions thrown around right now. And, when you don't have like APA or the Mathematical Statistical Association, and you don't have all these, so the Drupal Association, you don't have these bodies that are helping with definitions, it really does get confusing as to like what is hybrid remote, what's all remote or fully distributed. So we have 3 different definitions, and I'm going to kind of explain the definitions real quick. So these definitions are really based on like a centralized workplace. You'll hear a centralized workplace in the definition. So there are 3 different kind of types of remote work or telework, what we're calling it. The first one's a fully distributed term I heard from Matt Westgate from Lullabot in 2012 at DrupalCon Denver. Thank you, Matt. Fully distributed / all remote. Those type of companies have no centralized workplace. There's no on-site centralized workplace, and employees work from wherever they're the most comfortable and productive. Plain and simple. You can work wherever you want.
Corporate office, basically, right? Is that how you?
Correct. No on-site corporate office. And we're using centralized workplace, and had people say, well, you could have a centralized workplace in the cloud. I get that. So anyway, so yeah, all remote, no office, employees work for wherever they want. That's a pretty simple understanding. Hybrid remote, which is by far the most difficult to define because there's so many variations within hybrid remote. It's really almost impossible to define it because, hybrid remote could be 50% of the company works remotely while the others have to go into the office. You could have a situation where you go into the office a couple times a week. You have a situation like back in the day at Oomph, shout out old school Oomph, like you can go in whenever you felt like it. Like that whole idea, there's a lot of variations within that definition. So we just decided to create a simple definition. Not a simple definition, but a short definition that kind of encompasses all those. And hybrid remote companies, they have a centralized workplace where some employees commute to, while at the same time others work remotely. So again, that covers all those different spectrums within the hybrid remote. And then the last one, we've kind of just felt like, Jack Niles and telework has been kind of thrown out to the side. But like on the other end, telecommuting employees are required to commute to a centralized workplace a majority of the work week. We're really stuck on how many times per week, like, is it a number of times? Is it freedom to go in? And we finally just kind of drew a line in the sand. It's like, look, if you're required to go into the work week 3 out of 5 days, you're just telecommuting. You're working from home one day, but your main place of business is an on-site office. So a lot of people are mixing that up with hybrid, which we just don't agree on from a standpoint of hybrid remote has a different spirit to it. It's more about remote first, and everybody else is kind of working around that. Where in telecommute, you have to go into the office a majority of the work week. So that's how we define the 3 different types of remote work.
That kind of really opens up a lot of questions about how you classify remote work. But I think a lot of people listening to the show, especially, have become a lot more familiar with remote work or the possibility of working remotely this past year. How would you say that the pandemic both has changed remote work as well as, I assume, accelerated a lot of companies' move to being fully remote?
Yeah, that's a good question too, Nick. I would say that for the most part, I got to give credit to the Drupal community. Like, I've learned a lot of what I know from being in the Drupal sphere. A lot of companies, we're developers. We've been working remotely a long time. So I'm sure a lot of the listeners have been like, man, we've been doing this since I've been starting working, it's not new to us. But what I think the pandemic has done is it's made people experience what working remotely is like. People who were not maybe open-minded to it before. It was a forced shift. So what that's actually done is it's almost like the whole world has seen the light, where some of us have been doing this for years. And I would say that the biggest change that we're seeing is that there's a lot of opinions on remote work now, where before it was just like, that's something creepy people do in their pajamas. Like when I told people I work remotely, they'd be like, sure you do, buddy. Sure you do. So I feel like the biggest thing is that perceptions have changed. Everybody realizes that it can be done. And I think the biggest thing that we've noticed is the idea that people are very opinionated about whether it works and whether it doesn't. And it's just a big challenge because working during the pandemic is not the same. Working remotely during the pandemic is not the same that, John and I were used to back in the day. It's not the same. We can't go to meetups and stuff like that. So
I'm curious what you're seeing with kind of how it pulled back the curtain. Like a lot of companies really resisted going remote because they thought productivity would go down or people wouldn't actually do work. Mm-hmm. And while there's certainly a transition when you first start working from home, like you have to learn a new routine. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that is different, but once you get past those first few weeks and then few months, productivity can certainly increase. And a lot of companies saw huge increases in productivity. Are you seeing a lot of discussion in companies about those types of benefits and how to maintain that going forward?
We are seeing those discussions. And I think the companies that are forward thinking, the ones that you would assume are going to really dig into their successes and see whether they can kind of push those even further. Those are definitely the discussions that are being taken place. But honestly, a lot of things I've been reposting and sharing, it's kind of the opposite, Nick. Like, and again, I don't have any statistics on the number of companies that are failing, but you're starting to see as soon as there was some light, as soon as there was a possibility that, cases were going down, companies were really quick to start creating these mandated policies to return to the office. And what's really interesting to me, Nick, and in this situation is like, so you've been working for 18 months, some maybe even a little bit longer, maybe even 20. And if your company is still afloat, there has to be some validity to the fact that working remotely is possible. We're seeing a lot of, we're hearing the great resignation thrown around a lot like right now. And kind of going back to your first questions, what's changed the most? I think a lot of people have shifted their priorities. We heard Chad talking about he's moving from Baltimore to BC. I'm sure being remote is a huge proponent and him being able to do that with him and his family. You start just thinking things differently. So yeah, it's you would think that companies would be really excited to go fully remote or even hybrid remote, but we're actually starting to see the resistance of a conflict between employee and employer right now, where you have employees saying, this is great, I want more of this. It'd be great if I could see my friends a little bit more, but I want to do this all the time. Why am I going to battle traffic into Atlanta ever again? But then you're having the employer say, we need you to come back to the office at least a few times a month because our culture is eroding, which to me, those are very empty statements. Like you have one population, the employee, which has data. Hey, here are my calls. Here are my sales the past 18, 20 months. Here's my work. I've done it. I've performed. Then you have the company saying, well, we need you to come back because, the culture is just not there. Well, how are you, where is the data to support that? So that's a huge conflict that we're having right now. Huge conflict.
So Kaleem, this kind of seems like it runs a little bit abreast with, this sort of trust and credibility issues that some employers may have. When you can see them, there's this high degree of trust. And it also seems to run abreast with things like the results-oriented work environment type of concepts. Are you seeing an uptick in that?
I mean, so the question is, are we seeing an uptick in results-only work?
Or just a shift in mentality where people are starting to trust people that they can't see physically, that sure, we're on a Zoom call or I can call you, I can email you.
No, Chad, and no, that's what I, kind of going back to the question Nick was asking me before, is like, you would think that a lot more people would be, open from, and again, we're talking about leadership perspective. We're talking about from the company perspective, not from the employee's perspective. Because from the employee's perspective, you've had people that were anti-remote work their whole life, didn't even like it the first 3 months and now have adapted their routine and they're like, whoa, this is awesome. So from the employee perspective, we're seeing a lot of opinions change, especially as, school, because in the beginning you didn't have school, you had to do homeschooling. So, those opinions were like, this is the worst thing ever when I got everyone in the same sharing the internet. It's awful. But then you start seeing opinions change as, kids started going back to school.
Yeah.
But from the standpoint of trust, I am so happy you brought that up, Chad, because what we call the remote employee experience tree, T stands for trust, R stands for responsibility. There is no trust in management right now to be able to that's like, in my opinion, again, I don't have data on this, but why would you require people to come back to the office if you have data and stats that say you have been making just as much money or just as much revenue, if not more? What other reasons could there be?
Yeah, like paying for an office versus not paying for an office. That's a huge expense among many other factors.
Yeah, so I think trust, they're not there yet, to answer your question. No. And that's where we have to get to. We have to get out of this. It's been a long time for us to be in this hourly thing. And it's going to take probably long after we're gone to get past that. Hopefully someday, and us as developers, especially people who create automations and make things move faster, like, it took me 20 years to get this skill to build this automation, and it only took 10 minutes to do. The value there is still value. That value should be equivalent to me taking 100 hours to do it, because I conceptualized a way to cut that down. And you're telling me, well, now you have more hours in your day, do more work. I just kind of feel like we've just been so ingrained with this, probably just greedy. Like, look, Chad, you did this great thing. Now you have 5 hours left. I need you to do another 5 thing versus, well, should Chad just do this automation and not tell anyone about it? And then that way he doesn't get more work added to his, like, where's the inspiration for innovation? So yeah, people are not, right now, I think the trust it's not there. It's not there.
Actually interesting, Kaleem, that you mention, employees that were resistant to remote working and then start, working for a couple of months and then loving it. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was not like a huge fan of working from home all the time. I enjoyed going to the office, and since then I've changed jobs, and now I work fully remote, and I'm work from home all the time, and I really enjoy it. It gives me more time with the family. I'm actually wondering, shifting the conversation just a little bit to the kind of the remote worker experience, right?
Yes.
What is onboarding a fully remote worker in a fully distributed or hybrid remote organization look like?
Well, I mean, that definitely varies, but we'll just make pretend the best remote company in the whole wide world. First, that's going to start with things called pre-boarding, and that's, making sure that that's the things that they need to do before they even start the job, right? So ensuring that the computer shows up, ensuring that you have a little swag, something that says welcome to the team. I think in my experience, back in the day, sorry to always bring up old school stuff, but I felt like, when I was at UMF and I saw the computer just show up at my door one day, I was like, holy crap, like they're on point. Like, the computer's there. I got, a little welcome package is there, and people are like, oh, you don't need more swag. You're doing this. It's not about the swag at all. It has nothing to do with the swag. Like, let it go, people, with the swag. Like, it has everything to do with, we care. Like, I had a handwritten card that said, welcome to the team. Like, those things matter because you're not there. So a good pre-boarding process is important. Making sure that they have everything they need before they actually start. Signing the contract, signing the offer is one thing, but if there's a start date on X, say, December 1, it'd be nice to get all their stuff, November 20th. and as they're beginning to ramp up because people want to like start thinking about how they're going to work. So pre-boarding, then the actual onboarding process, as far as when you start, a good buddy system is great. Again, shout out. I've had that. It was good. But I think where a lot of people are kind of missing, and maybe some things that I could have, now that I've onboarded with multiple companies, and some things that a lot of people are missing is the whole introduction to the culture piece. I think that was, again, if I was going to be a little bit critical of that, the experience I've had, is that there hasn't been a lot of attention on that piece. And that can include something like a video from the CEO talking about his story as to why he started the company. Introduction videos from the team, like little quick videos like, hey, what's going on? I'm Kaleem and this is what I do. I like to mountain bike. I like to do things like that. Really kind of laying down the framework of the things that people are complaining about that you don't get in person, because there's some validity. Like, all remote is not great. I'm an advocate and I'm on the side, but there are things that are missing from the face-to-face. So when you're doing a remote work onboarding experience, you have to think about those things that you're missing and include those in the onboarding. So the story of why the company is really important, why the company was started, the intrinsic story, not the ridiculous story, the story of like Jeff Bezos was in the garage and he wanted to do something. Like, those are inspiring stories, man. Like, that's why people want to join that. And then obviously where you can get access to resources. There's some stat out there, and please don't crush me if I'm getting it wrong, but like, one of the biggest reasons people quit within the first 90 days is their lack of access to information. It has nothing to do, like, there's nothing more frustrating. And I dealt with this, like, for example, as a developer, you don't have an example of your code standards. Like, there's nothing more frustrating than pushing something up and then having it pushed back because maybe, you don't use negative margins, and I like to use negative margins. Like, learning those things, like, a lot of people are like, oh, well, that's just code review. I'm using code because, hey, talking to Drupal is here. But people are like, that's code review. That's how it's done. Like, you just live with it. It's like, well, not to everybody, like, to everybody, like, hey, that might hurt a little bit. Like, hey, like, why do you do it this way? Well, that's because in web development, there's a million ways to do it. There's not necessarily a right or a wrong way, right? So like, understanding those things are really important, and having that in the onboarding process is important. So access to information and being acclimated to the team are really critical.
I guess from a bookend standpoint, so that's the perspective of how an employer needs to really think of onboarding a remote worker. So if you're considering being a remote worker, maybe you kind of fell into it, but really didn't give it much consideration. Or maybe you're in a situation where, hey, this is now appealing, more so now recently. How do you prepare for that as a potential remote worker?
Yeah. So how do you prepare for that? So I don't know if there's a way for you to prepare for necessarily the onboarding standpoint, but what I would suggest, we'll put it in the show notes. There's an article that I was in on the Harvard Business Review last November that was quoted in talking about the culture, how to know if the culture is a right fit for you. And what I talk about in that article is like, just do your homework. There's a lot of resources out there for you to, research the company, their social media posts. I think I mentioned, hey, check out the social media post. If social justice is important to you, and you check out the social media and there's nothing about social justice or anything like that over the past couple of years, maybe that company is not necessarily for you. Looking at their job descriptions, looking for specific language, work hard, play hard, those typical terms like, or we'll work 80 hours if we need to. If you fit that culture, that's not a bad culture, just like Netflix, like you can have a hardcore culture. But I think making that more of a priority of you knowing what it is that you want, and then going out and doing your homework to make sure that they're actually following through on what they're talking about.
So do you recommend for somebody who maybe previously wasn't in a remote role. Maybe they were in a hybrid role, or maybe they were just like in the office all the time, right? Do you recommend trying it before you jump into it? Like, both feet, both hands, like just, I'm going to be remote. Is there some, mechanism or some way that a full in-person employee could try the remote process or the remote working experience to see if they like it?
Yeah, I never really thought of it from that perspective, John, honestly. That's something that I need to think more about. So thanks for
I'm just imagining an employee walling off their cubicle, making a little house in the cube farm, be like, I'm remote. I don't know anybody here.
The reverse office space, we'll call it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious solution here is just tell your boss you're going to work 1 day a week from home. Start there.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge with that is it's not the same because, again, you're just telecommuting.
Right.
You're still going to go into the office and print out the forms if you're still printing stuff. You know what I mean? Like if you're in that type of work environment. And again, Go ahead, jump in. What'd you say, John?
I was just going to say, it's also a little bit hard if your company doesn't support that culture to just be like, hey, guess what? I'm going to start doing this thing just to try it out,
Yeah, I guess what I would say is this, and again, I'm an advocate, so take this with a grain of salt, listeners. I believe that moving forward, you are going to have to upskill yourself. Like, you're going to have to train and learn how to succeed in the next type of work. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
I don't believe people are going to have the quote unquote liberty to just be like, yeah, remote work doesn't work for me. I'm all good. I'm not going to, it's not my thing. Like, as time progresses, I firmly believe, yes, you're going to have those big corporations that are going to just say, you're coming to the office, you must do that. But what people are experiencing right now, as far as small business, like, if you're a small business, and I'm talking about this on Tuesday with United Airlines, as far as small business, you are no longer in a localized market. The localized market stopped in 2020. Now, of course, we're talking about a supermarket. I get that, but things where you don't have to physically go there, like groceries and stuff like that. You are now competing. Your employees are now able to look at other jobs outside of your local market. I'm just going to use Maine, for example. So in Bangor, Maine, if you're a decent sized company and you're one of the larger employers and you're employing 150 people in the community, you're a big deal. And people were looking to work in that space. But now those 150 people that work for you, they're getting, LinkedIn, they're getting picked up from other companies all over the world saying, hey, you can work fully remote and we'll pay you more. And so, to kind of answer your question, John, I think this is a skill that people are going to have to learn how to do. I don't believe you are going to be a very good marketable employee or an attractive employee if you're trying to increase your earnings and do these things. I don't know if that's going to be possible moving forward. If you're like, no, I'm not going to work remotely. Sorry, not going to do it. I think your choices are going to be a lot more limited.
Interesting. So I'm curious from the employer perspective. So for companies looking at going remote, one of the things that I'm curious about is what do they have to prepare? When you look at things like salary, benefit, traditionally, if you were in Southern California, pay was significantly higher than if you're in Kansas. And if a company is fully remote, even if we're just talking nationally, so forget about dealing with if somebody is in a different country at the moment.
Yep.
What kind of considerations are there? Because you can no longer assume somebody is living nearby. Somebody might be living in Kansas, somebody might be living in, San Francisco, and you're not going to pay people based on where they're living if you're a fully remote company. How do you compete nationally on things like salary and benefits at that point?
Okay, so let me put the salary and benefits piece second. Don't let me get off track, sure. Nick, okay? Don't let me get off track. As far as, what companies have to do to kind of prepare to go remote, if there's one thing that you're gonna, if you're a company owner and you're listening, the one piece of advice that I could give to you is do not do anything without assessing the current remote employee experience. And what I mean by that is you need data. You need to know what your employees' workplace flexibility preferences are. So you need to do your due diligence first before you even start thinking about writing some sort of policy, before you start implementing these things. Because what, for example, let's just make pretend you send out this company-wide survey, or you have this panel in this forum, and everyone's like, look, I don't care. I know it's cool, but I want to be in the office 100%. Well, there it is. You have your answer. Everyone wants to be in the office. Don't think that's going to happen, but let's just make pretend that happens. Well, then now you move forward with that. Maybe you should not implement a remote work policy in that situation. But let's just say everyone says, yo, I only want to come into the office once a week, but you are already going to send out a policy that says we need you in the office 3 times a week. Apple, how did you do that? I don't understand you. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about a month, Apple sent out the remote work policy without asking anybody what it is that they wanted, how they could contribute, what are the challenges that they have. They just said it. And then, of course, the open letter to Tim Cook, written by 100 employees, supported by 3,000 employees. You just don't want that. So the piece of advice, do the research, get some data first, get some input, and involve your employees in creating this experience. Involve them. So that's number one. The thing that you brought up, Nick, about salaries, that is a big one. And I don't have the answers for that one. That is something that the industry is trying to figure out, the country, the world. Google just sent out they're creating a pay calculator, which, shout out to Buffer for creating that years ago. But it was very controversial. And that was another negative piece of news of you're going to reduce my salary if I move from San Francisco offices to Maine. That is, I don't have the answer to that. I'm split right down the middle. There's the human part, well, you paid me X amount of dollars, pay everyone the same for that type of role. It's simple.
They're obviously worth that pay.
They're worth that pay, so pay them.
Yeah.
But then, one night I'm trying to thinking about it. I'm like, geez, now you're penalizing people that live in the city that love big buildings and good restaurants, dog. So now you're penalizing them, because at the end of the day, what you're talking about is disposable income. So it's a little tricky, because you have salary, but there's more to salary than just the number they pay you. It's also about the disposable income that you're going to have, hence why there's different pay rates in different parts of the country. So what you're kind of doing, if you pay someone $100,000 in San Francisco, and then they move to Maine, but that developer was already in Maine, both developers at both positions were only making $50,000 in Maine, and now I took my $100,000 and took it to Maine, my disposable income, the value that I'm getting, the cash that I have available to me to spend is way more. So I understand that people will probably say, well, you're choosing to live in San Francisco. There's no reason for you to you could move to Kansas if you want and have more disposable income. Well, that's not always the case. People don't always have those choices.
Well, I think you're providing the value to the company that's worth whatever they were paying you in San Francisco. So I believe both employees should be paid the same. And if somebody chooses to live in San Francisco, they'll have less disposable income, not reduce those salaries, because they're still generating enough value for the company to pay that salary. I believe everybody should just make that salary.
Yeah, but so back to the disposable income though, Nick. Yeah, I love this. Let's get some back and forth on this. So Nick, what about the disposable income though? So you're telling me that's fair. That's fair, because look, $100,000 in San Francisco basically gets you a 1-bedroom of 500 square feet. But because I choose to live in San Francisco, I should live, because I'm living in a different standard. I'm living in a lower standard. So now, what I mean by that is the things that I'm able to do in San Francisco, that quality of life, it's way lower than the person in Maine, because they have more cash and more access to resources to do those things. So I know, anyway, what do you think, Chad?
I wanted to interject. It's something where we have an established norm, and I don't want to say these are the same thing. They're not. But take a look at something like a per diem when you travel. Depending on what city you're in, you might have a much higher per diem in like Tokyo, New York City, San Francisco,
Absolutely.
that sort of thing, versus somewhere else. And I don't think
and why
the
is that, Chad?
so simple.
Why do you think that is, though, Chad?
Because things are more expensive.
Right. So for example, Nick, so now if I want a hamburger in Tokyo, I'm going to give them $100. If I want a hamburger in Maine, as a company, I'm going to give them $10. They both need to get the hamburger.
Yeah, I think there's.
Is that
a
Kobe beef hamburger? Just wondering. Obviously, we're not going to solve this problem.
No,
today.
Definitely not. It's a huge.
It
huge
almost
challenge.
Sounds to me like we need to pay people what they're worth, which I'm a firm believer in. Pay people what they're worth as far as like an industry goes, right? Hey, you're a developer, you're doing this thing, you're providing this value to the company. Pay that person what they're worth. And then companies almost sounds like they need to develop a bonus program where they can say, like, depending on where you live, you get a living bonus of X number of dollars. And this is to compensate you because you want to live in San Francisco, and that's okay. But San Francisco is more expensive than, the middle of Maine.
But could we distinguish the difference between I want to live in San Francisco versus I have to live in San Francisco because the company requires me to physically come into an office?
Exactly. So a lot of people would choose to live somewhere else on that salary to increase their buying power, and that would reduce the cost of living in San Francisco as people move out.
I guess what I'm saying is, yes, let's pay the people what they're worth, and then whether they have to or they want to, let's give them more money depending on where they have to reside, right?
If you choose to live in San Francisco, that's on you, but it's not that simple. It's such a complicated problem. It's like, geez, I don't know the answer. And what John is saying is basically the payment calculator that Google and these companies are creating. So I think it's about terminology, how you're presenting it.
So I guess the question is, if let's take specific companies out of it. If I'm doing a job, web development company, and that job generates the company $500,000 a year, why should the company make more profit if I choose to live in Maine versus San Francisco?
I don't think
based on my work.
I don't think anybody's saying that they should. I think we're saying we should pay people what they're worth and then give them extra depending on where they live, right?
Yeah, I think the question might be, are they trying to attract an employee to that physical location? And if so, then you probably want to pay them more. But if that's not part of the scenario, then you're leaning back towards equal pay across. So I think it's not.
I don't think there's an answer. Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
It's so complicated. Which is why I wanted to ask it. I didn't want to ask a difficult question, but it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have Kaleem back for remote work payment.
I mean, in theory, like, I get what you're saying, Nick, and I actually believe in what you're saying too. Like, I think I need to clarify that. Like, I believe in that, but I also am aware of unintended consequences. Like, you don't want to punish someone because they enjoy a certain lifestyle. And as much as you want to kind of admit it, like, in a weird way, you kind of are. Now, what John has suggested is exactly, in my opinion, the only fair way. But there's a huge but here. And the reason why I like Buffer's pay calculator, because they're the ones that came up with it a long time ago, and Google's now doing theirs, is the only difference I see with how they did it is they show you the equation as you're there. And you can go to Buffer's pay calculator. It's open source. It's just Google Buffer pay calculator and you'll see it. Everyone can play with it. It's great. And it does exactly what John's talking about. You get a base salary. We'll just say front end dev, 100,000 is the value that you're getting as a front end dev. That's one thing. On top of that, you have, cost of living, exactly, a living thing. The difference in this situation is, as a new applicant, you understand the situation. You know that, okay, if I move from San Francisco to Maine, that little bonus, the living bonus that John talks about, is going to be less. So you ahead of time what I'm having a very difficult, what I do not agree with is the situation where, you've been at Google or whatever company for X number of years, you've gotten used to that. This policy was not in place before. And even if it was like hush, 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 and it was out in public. What I don't agree with is taking money away from people right now. What I don't agree with is like, well, when I signed up, this wasn't the case. Their argument would be, well, when you signed up, you were coming here to work. Well, now now we're back to your point, Nick, of, well, now you're just taking the money away just because you were paying me that before. So there's no difference now.
It comes down to the company being interested, in my opinion. It comes down to the company being interested in its bottom line as opposed to the employee. And
being equitable, being fair, right? And
I think you're right. Like, being more open about what people are getting paid and how your pay, your compensation is calculated is super important. Again,
I know we got to move on. I know we have to move on, but the last thing I want to say on this is, government employees, like, this whole thing about people not afraid of how much you make, it's just the weirdest thing in the world. Like, it's almost as if people don't want to know. I don't want you knowing my business. Well, guess what? In government, my salary history at Kennesaw State is online right now. So I agree with you, John. We have to get out of this whole thing of keep my salary secret so that everybody can ensure that they're getting a value of their job, so that they get the right value, because the more you hide it, the more you're not getting the value.
Yeah, and I mean, when I say open, like, I mean, I guess the calculation that goes into determining my value, right? And making sure that that's an even playing field from my position to another, like position. Anyway.
Yeah. Let's move on.
I think, we may have another show topic that just came out of this, but let's talk more about the fact that, more employees are working remotely. We all agree with that, right? And with that, do we risk developing a culture of seclusion and like introvertism, if that's even a word, with that?
So basically, are we moving towards isolation versus community? Are you creating a environment where everybody's kind of by themselves and not connected? Yeah, I think there is legitimate risk, John. I think that is, and again, what are the biggest, if I'm just going to ask you all, I'm going to switch it around. I'm going to interview you all. What's the largest negative? Is that the right way? What's the biggest downfall to working remotely? It's Chad. I want to hear your answer. What do you think? What's the biggest problem with working remotely, in your opinion?
Yeah, a lack of social interactivity, I would argue. And you kind of have to combat that.
Okay, John, what do you think? The biggest problem working remotely?
I got to agree. It's not going to an office and talking to people every day. And you really gotta dig deep to try to rekindle that.
Nick?
I'm going to hedge a bit because for two reasons. One, it's a little bit different when you work for a company than you're a freelancer.
True. Very true.
Because being just a freelancer, you have that kind of extra wall too.
Yes.
So that's always a negative. The second is, I think it really also depends if you're partially hybrid. Wait, what were your terms?
Hybrid remote.
Whether you're fully distributed or hybrid remote. Because if you're hybrid remote, then the downside is the people that are in person, things like their ideas get chosen more often.
Okay.
Those kinds of things. So your promotions can be reduced because you don't have that face time. You don't have.
You're not answering the right question, Nick. You're not answering the right question. So if you're going to work remotely, what's the biggest problem you think? Just 100% remote.
I'd have to agree, probably.
Okay.
With the other two.
So
yeah.
Yes, it's the biggest challenge. It's the biggest problem. It's literally in my like it's by far the biggest problem with the remote work are building those social connections. So are we at risk? Yes, John, we are at risk. My argument here, though, is that it's the responsibility, the R and tree, the remote employee experience. It's the responsibility of the employer to ensure that there are resources being allocated to alleviate those challenges. So the annual company retreat, the shout out of great retreat, shut it down for a week. It was about building connections, solving problems. You're going to save, if you reduce your office space, you're going to save some money. You can't just go put that in your investors' pockets, in your stakeholders' pockets. No, if you save $100, you're probably going to have to spend 60 or 75 of that $100 savings to bring people together, to allow the teams to do maybe regional retreats, plus a company retreat, plus, all these different perks so that they can do hobbies, go to conferences, increasing their professional development travel so that they can meet people at DrupalCon, so that they don't have to have a presentation in order to go to DrupalCon. That's a common like requirement for a lot of companies. Yes, if only you can go only if you present. So yeah, I just feel like, yes, there's a serious risk, but the responsibility falls on the employee the employer to ensure that the resources that they're saving from remote are being reallocated to building those connections.
So how do you solve that problem? I mean, you mentioned a couple of things like the annual retreat or, a department retreat or something like that. But if I just started a new job and the annual retreat was 2 months ago, how do you build those relationships in those 10 months? Like, are there weekly things that you make sure your team is doing? Are there monthly things that you make sure people are hitting? How do you ensure that those connections happen?
Yeah, I think that's a great question too. Like, of course, you can't have a million retreats, but I would say one retreat in a fully remote company is not enough. For that reason, Nick, like there should be some sort of, I would say once a quarter, you need to see somebody, get together, so a lot of companies aren't 100% fully remote, like meaning that you can live anywhere in the country. A lot of companies are saying, hey, you have to live within 6 hours drive of this city. That's still kind of remote. That's still, that can still spread pretty far, and that can allow people to drive in, for, a week-long retreat a little bit more frequently. I think the online things are cool, but I think by now we're all kind of a little exhausted of, some of the, Zoom happy hours. Donut's also cool, but that gets a little exhausting of, I got another donut meeting, and shout out to Donut. I love it. But, sometimes those things can just, wear you down a little bit. So
what is a donut meeting?
Donut is
like me that don't know what that is.
Yeah. Donut is a Slack app that randomly pairs you with someone else on your team for a video call.
That sounds like a nightmare.
it's pretty cool. I mean, it's something. It's better than nothing, right? It's better than nothing. But yeah, there are a lot of things you can do. An activity calendar. I think scheduling those, if you are going to do those things, scheduling those things in advance so people can prepare. I would also say, no matter what activity you do, let's just say you want to do an online event to kind of build some rapport, don't do it after hours. Shut it down. You can afford, every company can afford to take a day or 2 or 3 or 4 days off. Shut it down and allow the whole day and let people say, wow, and make it fun. Everything doesn't have to be about strategy. It's about like, hey, Nick, what is it in the back of your, like, I could tell you like Star Wars, dude. Tell me about how you built that thing in the back. I forgot the names of what those were. But anyway, like make it about building connections. So there are things that you can do virtually, but once the pandemic is over, of course, once we're able to get together safely, ensuring that your people are getting together in a quarterly basis is, I think, really important.
Kaleem, isn't it also kind of on the employee to kind of get out there too? Like the employer has a responsibility to make sure people are getting together, right? But isn't it also on the employee to kind of like interact with people via Slack, via, events? I know, when I went to a remote position, I talked to my team, I talked to the people that work at my company via our chat app, but I also jump into Drupal Slack via Drupal Slack via Slack. That's a great statement. Go to events, go to Drupal events via Zoom. Like, I think a lot of the onus is on the employer, but I think there's also some onus on the employee to kind of like exercise those interactions as well.
Yeah. Thank you, John, for bringing that up. So 100% trust. It's reciprocal. It's both ways, right? The employer needs to assume trust in the employee, and then the employee has to trust the employer. And then back to responsibility. We just talked about all the responsibilities that the employer must take to ensure that the employees are not isolated. But you're absolutely correct, John. Like, if you're an introvert, remote work is great, but there's still a challenge for introverts out there when working remotely, because you have to do those things, John, to if you want to be connected, you have to, if you want to be about it, you got to be about it. Like, sorry, the rap lyric got in my head, but you know what I mean? Like, you can't sit back. You can't just say, I'm so no one wants to talk to me. They're going to get the promotions. They're all buddy. You have to be able to try to find something. Now, outside of work, if we're just talking about loneliness and not connecting with your teams, I believe connecting with your company teams is a big responsibility on the company. Like I firmly believe the company needs a social connection strategy. Like, that's a strategy that a remote company needs to put at a high level. They need a strategy on how people are going to be socially connected. As far as just isolation and loneliness, because one thing we haven't talked about is that, I feel bad for all my single people out there. I don't feel bad because y'all out there having a good time. I get it. But at the same time, when you're talking about the remote work experience, you see everyone kind of talking about family, kids, dogs, pets. Everyone's talking about that, but like, no one's really talking about the single person who was reliant on the company for their social connections. Because, again, we're a social species, we're a tribal species. So we need to be around people, hence why there's always been tribes. But for the person who's feeling isolated and lonely, they do have to take on that responsibility to try to find where they can have those social connections that they were having in the office somewhere else. So some people, they got their families. Like, John, you talked about it earlier at the beginning. Like, you don't necessarily need a whole bunch of external social connections because you feel like you're fulfilled in some way. Some people were reliant on the office. A lot of people who were single relied on the office for that tribal experience, that daily connections. For those people, it's really important for them to try to find something outside of work to connect to, a running group, a hobby group, something. It's really important. So you're right.
So I think that dovetails into probably a more pointed question. So you're talking about different ways to make those connections, both with your peers and from a personal perspective. But just to kind of wrap that back into a nice, neat package, how have you seen remote work impact behaviors and routines of both yourself and your peers?
Yeah. So for me, the biggest change was me being able to exercise. I think when, the first time I was fully remote, me being able to get out and exercise was a big change. Big change in my routine. And it's hard, and I'm still working on it. I think that's the other thing. Like, I don't want to say it's new, but it's going to take some time for people to figure out their groove, I realized, probably later on, that I needed to get up really early to be super productive, like 5 a.m. type early, maybe even sometimes at like 4:30, to get up and try to get, especially all you billable hour people out there, get up really early to try to get in some billable hours early. start off the day ahead. Then, taking a 2-hour bike ride in the middle of the day was much easier because you were already ahead and you could really integrate. We call it work-life integration, not work-life balance, actually. You need to be able to, it's not this or that. It's how you can integrate those together.
These.
Yes. So from my perspective, that has been the biggest, getting the routine has been a change. I think for what we're seeing, the big changes and the big challenges people are having are that trust factor. I think those routines are changing. Hope they're not changing, but those are the things that are the really, really big issues. We used to be, I used to be able to tap you on the shoulder. Well, changing your behavior, tapping on the shoulder was never good. Like, everyone loves to say that. Well, I used to be able to just go over and tap someone on the shoulder and get my answer. Like, you just interrupted someone, man. Like, you just interrupted someone, and it takes people another 15 minutes to get back into that zone. Like it was convenient for you as the interrupter. So I think that has been the biggest challenge. And some people are changing that mentality of, okay, I have to think about switching to asynchronous communication versus synchronous. I need to understand that John's not going to answer at 11 because he's going for a walk. John's going to answer maybe at 3:30. So I think that's the biggest thing.
So from your perspective, does remote working provide a net positive or net negative for companies? I think we touched on this quite a bit, but just at a high level, what do you think?
Question.
What do you think those net positives and net negatives are?
So you're saying, so what's the net positive for companies allowing remote work? That's one side.
Yep.
So the net positives are more access to talent. You're no longer restricted to talent based on your location. If inclusion and diversity is important to you and your company, much easier for a company in Maine to get a little bit more diverse because they're remote. And for those that you don't know, I bring up the stat a lot. Maine is something like 98.9% white. So it's very difficult for a company in Maine to be more diverse, right? So there's that. There's office space, reduction in static expenses. I don't know if there's a better word for that, but things that are just always there. I think those are some of the two major big ones, as far as companies. And now 2021 retainment, it's gangster out there right now. People people are quitting because they're like, what? You're going to make me travel in traffic in Atlanta? So retainment. So those are the real positives. And also procedures, operations. Like, people realize that the people ops people are critical. Like, having a system is critical.
Yeah.
So operations have definitely improved because now you have to have a handbook, you have to have documentation. You can't just fly by the seat of your pants. So those are the positives. Innovations as well. The negatives for the companies are really from the standpoint of not doing it well, not doing remote work well. And the negative is, yes, net negative, culture erosion, isolation and loneliness, because you're not doing the things that we talked about earlier. So that's really kind of the major negative. The other negative is, if you don't do that, are you no longer, may you become a little less competitive over time because you're losing talent.
So yeah, wondering there, you had posted an article from LinkedIn that in a channel that we're both part of, and I had actually read a similar article in Harvard Business Review a couple of months ago, talking about how FaceTime and people that are in the office versus remote workers. Those people in the office are going to get more FaceTime with their managers, and that's going to lead them to promotions, better work experience, possibly raises, and so on and so forth. I wonder if you can, quickly kind of express to us how you feel FaceTime is important, or are there ways to, overcome that as a remote worker?
So I will say that challenge I have with these statements are they're not proven.
Sure.
Because most people just started working remotely 18 months ago. So for researchers, and that's what really made me upset about this article, who wins in a hybrid or remote, because you have this business school Wharton talking about this, that interns, felt like that they weren't as equally included as the other interns. Well, yeah, because that's a situation that it's not done well. It's not done correctly. So it really infuriates me when people are talking about these types of things and almost kind of validating the wrong way, the things that we've been doing wrong all these years. Because what you're telling me is we're going to give a promotion to somebody because they have their butts in seats. Like, really?
Yeah.
That just doesn't even make sense. And then you're saying, well, the manager has these unconscious biases. They don't even know that they're having these unconscious biases. So that's the problem. And it's like, well, fix the problem. Don't just say that's the way it's going to be. So yeah, for me, I just, we have to move past that. And I absolutely 100% just disagree with that statement, because one, it hasn't been proven. And two, there's a stat out there. Y'all Google this and find the stat yourself. But people have said they've had more FaceTime with their managers and senior level executives than ever since being remote. And you know why that is? You can't get the CEO you can't just walk into the CEO's office and even talk to them. Like think about this. When we're back in office, you can't just roll into the CEO. Most people can't just roll into the CEO's office and be like, hey, I can see that thing. Well, now CEOs are giving their talks. They may not be able to interact with him directly, but they're seeing his face, or her face, excuse me, and their face. And basically they see maybe their partner in the background. They see their pets. They're attaching some sort of human connection to that person. So again, there are some misleading stats out there of, well, you have more FaceTime. Well, right now, John, we've had an hour of FaceTime. So what do you mean? People are actually, it's already out there. The research is out there that people and managers are having more FaceTime with their managers and supervisors than ever. So it's I don't know. It's just more, to me, it's just more of the old guard trying to put out content to make sure that the old guard stands. I mean, I don't know.
I agree.
As we get ready to close out the show, this has been great. Thank you for joining us. It's always great to have a subject matter expert on to talk about something that we haven't really covered too much.
Call me lifelong learner. Call me lifelong.
Lifelong learner. Can you give us a kind of the elevator pitch for what BlendMe Inc. is mission is, what they're trying to do before we close out?
Yeah, plain and simple. We're trying to help startups and small businesses improve the whole remote employee experience. And that starts from the day that someone reads your job description to the day that they leave your company. We're actually consulting with a small, I guess $50 million isn't too small, but we're consulting with a company out of Manhattan, and they're a generational company, and they realized that, hey, we could do this hybrid. And we're helping them kind of convert from an 8-to-5 family New Yorker type company to a hybrid company. And that consists of doing an assessment. We did a workplace flexibility assessment with the company to determine what some of their biggest challenges are, what their biggest preferences are, how long the commutes are, things like that. And then we're going to be working with them on with a cohort of the company to develop what would be kind of their workplace policies. So, when to use Slack or chat tools, when to use internal communication strategy, better processes and stuff like that. So yeah, we're trying to help people with people operations side for remote companies.
Have questions or feedback, reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal, or in the Talking Drupal channel on Drupal Slack, or you can email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can get show updates by signing up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
You can promote your Drupal camp on Talking Drupal. You can learn more about this at the talkingdrupal.com/camp promo page.
Drupal Camp Atlanta, Drupal Camp Atlanta, Drupal Camp Atlanta.
This guy loves hyping his brand. Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar. Gentlemen, we have come to the end of our show here. This is typically where we do the shameless self-promotion and telling people how they can get in contact with you. So Kaleem, you're the guest. We'll start with you. How can people get a hold of you?
Kaleem Clarkson everywhere. That's on LinkedIn. That is on Twitter. And of course, you can check out our website at blendmeinc.com.
Chad?
Yeah, so you can get in touch with me either on Drupal.org. My username there is Chad Hester, or on Twitter, Chad K. Hester. And always a plug for people that I work with. So I've been working very heavily with ImageX. If you're looking for doing some Drupal sites, hit us up and we'll help you out.
Nick Laughlin.
You can always find me everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
I'm John Picozzi. My phone won't stop ringing. I'm John Picozzi, and you can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, as well as Drupal.org. And if you're interested in EPAM, you can find out more about us at epam.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Great to see you guys.
Have a good one.